Hello, I'm Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy, and there are curves ahead. In this week's video for the Free-motion Challenge Quilting Along, we're quilting continuous curve lines and learning how to put them together to make an interesting motif. And be sure to stay tuned through the rest of this video because at the end, I have some quilty eye candy, which will show you how to turn these curves into some interesting stuff. So it's week 3. I hope you've had an amazing time last week working with the meander and the echo lines. If you haven't had a chance to watch that video, be sure to check it out. Now there are a few questions that came up from the last video that I want to address in this video. The first thing is stitching in the ditch. You know I love stitching in the ditch. I love how it makes the seams lay nice and flat. And I normally would do it on my blocks, but I'm not showing it in the videos because I don't want to overwhelm people that are newer at quilting. So if you want to do that, go for it. Also, I'm starting in the middle of the quilt. So the 2 blocks I did last week are in the middle, and the 2 blocks I'm going to do this week are also in the middle. So we're doing those 4 blocks that are all in the center. But don't worry about it. You can quilt whatever block you want. We're not making this harder than it has to be. But before we get started, let me say congrats. I am loving all the pictures of the quilting that I'm seeing. I'm loving all the encouragement. And if you're feeling discouraged, don't. You're doing your best quilting right now. As we progress through the weeks, you're going to get better and better. So don't give up. Keep going with the challenge. So let's talk about continuous curve. Continuous curve quilting is just quilting a curved line that goes from corner to corner of a block to give it this rounded, fun effect. It's great for smaller blocks or for bigger blocks that are made up of smaller pieces. So instead of piecing a block with a lot of little squares, I decided it'd be easier just to mark them out. Now you don't have to have any special tools, just grab a ruler and a marking utensil. I'm just using a chalk pencil. There's also a stencil that will mark out the 9 patch as well, but we're going to show it with the ruler. And since our block is roughly 9 inches, give or take a little bit, depending on how poor my piecing was, I'm going to go ahead and mark these out into 3-inch blocks. So there we go. I have my 9 smaller blocks, and it's time to start continuous curve quilting. Now with regular continuous curve, what I'm doing is going from one point, curving to the next, curving, and curving until I return to the starting point. Now that's great, but what's going to happen is that's going to bring me back to where I started. But if I'm doing a big row of blocks or a big section, I want to be able to quilt that whole section without starting and stopping. So I'm going to show you how efficient it is to move around this whole block without starting and stopping. So starting from the outer corner, I'm going to quilt a line that curves to the next point of my block. Now that I'm here, I'm actually going to quilt this seam or this row of blocks right here by quilting my curves down and then back up to where I started. So I'm looking at this vertical seam right here and quilting that. On to the next. Repositioning my hands often because this is where I have the most control. And down to the bottom. So here's my first row, and as you can tell, I have that serpentine line where it's going from one side to the other and back, and what that does is as I come back and do the other side, it's going to make those lines cross at that point. Of course, you could do one side and the other, it doesn't matter, but I know I need to head back to where I started. At each corner, that's a good place to reposition my hands. I'm putting my eyes on the next corner and then moving on. So now that I have that first seam finished, I'm going to quilt another curved line that's going to go to the next one so I can do that one as well. Then doing the same along this one. And now that I'm done with both of those seams, I'm going to curve on to the next point and then use the perimeter to work my way around to this set right here. And there I have the first section of the design. Now, one thing you have to remember, if you have a curve that looks kind of weird or one that doesn't go out as far as the other, don't worry. Once all these lines get quilted, all you're going to see is the overall texture. So try not to focus on the individual lines. Wait till it's all done. And now that I've used that perimeter to get to this next line, I'm going to do the same thing, except now I'm going to be crossing over this line, but I'm still putting my eye at that point. I'm still trusting my hands to bring me there. It's going to be fine. Coming in, the opposite side. On to the next. Just like that, and one last row. And I'm almost done. I have my horizontal and my vertical lines done. All I have to do now is work my way around the perimeter until I get back to where I started. I feel completely comfortable quilting these arcs, but if you're having trouble, and if you happen to have the Archie ruler, that's what I designed this curve for. It's for the continuous curve to give you that nice arc. So if you have it around, you can try using that as well, and that will just help give you that more consistent arc. One last side left to do and I'm finished. All right, let's see how it turned out. There I have my nice continuous curve, and I like how it makes those secondary patterns come out, almost like circles. So whether you use a ruler or you freehand it, the result is going to be a design that's going to look stunning on your quilts. Now, once you feel comfortable with the concept of continuous curve quilting, you can rearrange those lines to make some really cool motifs for your blocks. We're still using curves to go from point to point. We're just adding a few more points to our block to make this beautiful flower shape. The points that we're going to use to quilt the motif are the corners of our block. We're also going to use the middle sides of each block as well as the center. So we're going to quilt curves that go to all those points. Now you can eyeball it if you'd like, or you can mark it out depending on how visible the area is going to be. And I'm going to go ahead and use my basic 8 stencil to mark this out. And that's going to help give me those guidelines that I need. So the motif can come all the way to the edges of the block, or I can stop them just short so that I can fill in around it, and I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to imagine that my dots are just about 1 inch or 2 inside each of these points. To help make it a little bit more noticeable, I might use a quick little mark to give me that reference line. There we go. Let's start quilting. This motif can start from any of the points of the design, but since I want to make it centered in the block and I really want to make it shine, I'm actually going to start in the center. I know that might be kind of crazy, especially as much as I dislike starting and stopping, but sometimes you got to do what you don't like. So we're going to start in the center, but just know you don't have to. For this motif, I'm going to start from the center and quilt a line that curves out to my point and back to the starting. So what I'm doing is, as I'm quilting, I'm putting my eye on the point that I want to end up at and trusting my hands to bring me there. Once I return home, I'm going to curve out to the next point and then back. Now let me tell you what I'm not worrying about. I'm not worrying about how much this overlaps or even if my arc is symmetrical. Instead, I'm really trying to make it land on the point that I've determined. So don't worry about all the other stuff, just focus on that point. Now, as you're quilting, you might find it helpful to turn the quilt, especially if there's a direction that feels more comfortable for you, or especially if you can't see the point. It's completely up to you. Out to the next point and back. So as you can guess, this design gets pretty thread heavy in the center, and that's how it's supposed to be. All that quilting is going to draw your eye to the center of the block. If you don't want that thread to show up quite as much, using a matching thread color in a thinner weight is really going to help it from being too overwhelming. I prefer a 50 weight thread such as Aurifil cotton or Superior So Fine, but it really is up to you and the effect that you're going for. And then I'm going to work my way around to all those points, always coming back to the center each time until I've hit them all. And there I finished my motif. Now, if you're having trouble letting go of the idea that they don't have to be perfect, you might want to go ahead and use an arced ruler, because what that'll do is help give you those nice perfect petals. I don't mind a little bit of organic flowers, so I'm not worried about it, but that's definitely a nice option. But no matter how you quilt the motif, once you're finished, you can decide whether you want to show it off or hide it, depending on how happy you are with the results. That's what I love about machine quilting. It allows you to creatively handle those unintentional customizations that you might make. For instance, if I love the motif and I really want to show it off, I'm going to put a smaller design around it. It's going to really smash down that area and let that motif pop. If I quilted it and I thought, not so much, I'm going to use a filler similar in size, and it's going to let that whole overall texture kind of help hide the motif just a bit. So I think what I'm going to do is use that dense filler to fill in around the motif. So I'm going to travel my way back out here because I don't want to have to break thread. So I'm just going to kind of eke my way on out slowly, like so. And then now that I'm out here, I'm going to use that meander that we learned last week to fill in around it. And let's see the finished result. And there we have the beautiful motif with the meandering around it. And again, I just want to reiterate, if you didn't want your motif to show up as much, you could use a bigger meander around it. It's going to really help hide it. So now it's time for quilty eye candy. I want to show you just how much fun you can have with this technique, but I don't want it to be intimidating. These samples are just meant to be inspiration. They're kind of my persuasive argument to make you love this design as much as I do. So once you learn the technique, of course you can use it in differently shaped blocks. But if you're quilting a star and you're not wanting minimal, you're wanting more, take that motif technique and apply it to those blocks. Basically, I'm just adding more curves to more points to create a really nice, dense design that draws your eye to the center of the block. Of course, you don't have to use this technique in all the blocks. Combine it with other designs. In a similar star block, I quilted some geometric straight lines with my rulers and then those curved lines as well. And here's another star block and another instance of combining those geometric straight lines with the curvy continuous curved lines. And you can see a slightly different arrangement, but still really fun. And if I'm being honest, I like quilting continuous curve in the negative space as well. Using the quilting to create the blocks and filling them in is a really, really easy way to give these secondary patterns to your quilts, just like I did in this quilt. Of course, if you want to take it up a notch, you can combine the echoing that we learned last week and this motif and make a really cool design. In this plus block, I used the quilting to create the square that I wanted to fill in, quilted that echo line, and then added, of course, the continuous curve motif. Really fun. So what do you think? I hope you're excited to give continuous curve quilting a try. I think you'll find you'll be able to use it on lots of your quilts. Thank you so much for joining me. Be sure to let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next week when we talk about leafy meanders and quilting arcs on our quilts.